thing. Okay. All right. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I wanted to make some content because I'm going to start doing this. I messed up the first time because I used somebody else's video. I was giving commentary. It talks about commentary in the guidelines, but I guess they don't. I had heard other YouTubers say they don't pay attention to that, so I should have known better. But I'm good now. I just have to make sure that I'm using stuff from Creative Commons, or I'm like using like very small snippets of stuff from other videos, which is unfortunate because I like the other one. But yeah, the purpose of the channel is to analyze and evaluate arguments. I've taught research and argumentation for 7 or 8 years. It seems to be something that people don't always think about, or people have different opinions about, so maybe my opinions on it are wrong, but I have a pretty straightforward way that I go about analyzing and evaluating arguments, and so I'd like to share that. If you check in the description, there's lots of details in there, lots of stuff for you to engage with me on. You could call in. I'm not going to be doing this for forever tonight because I'm trying to get on a sleep schedule, so that's going to be my next thing over the next week, is trying to make sure that I'm doing this earlier in the day. But I really wanted to create content, so yeah. And then also there's a game, so if you're interested in learning how to engage with people in terms of their arguments, or thinking about how to make one yourself, there's a game that I made to try to help people out with that. And it can sometimes remove some of the emotions that kind of stifle the conversations, and that's what I'm going to try to do here, is analyze these arguments in a straightforward manner without getting my emotions too involved. Emotions are a natural human thing, but I think being aware of them is really important. I think that's most of the major details. Let's see, I am developing a whole course too, so there's lots of stuff that I've made to check out. So I'm thinking about what I want to look at. I'll end up covering, I'm sure, a lot of anything that comes out that's new. I want to engage with that in terms of like arguments that are being made. Arguments aren't always being made. I think that's kind of the first issue. So I'm not sure. I think I'm going to go to modern day debates. Let's see. Modern day debate. Yeah. Because I'm pretty sure that they're still... Do I need to still do this? Let's see. I'm going to assume that these are in the Creative Commons. Let's see. Flat Earth. I don't want to do that. I've done that before. Evolution versus creation. I might do that one. Those can kind of be hard to evaluate. I know quite a bit about evolution and biology, but I don't know everything. It might be hard to explain some of it. This is what I was watching earlier, and it was confusing. This is like the hot topic of the day. Yeah, this is actually going in the same vein of the video I made earlier. Maybe I'll do this one. Are men ignored / unappreciated today? What do I want to do? Evolution. I'm going to do this one just because of the whole like Andrew Tate thing that's going on. Yeah, I'm going to do this one. The manosphere is like really strong. This is kind of an old, outdated conversation. Still interesting though. I'm sure we could dissect some of the arguments here, but let's listen to this. There's one with a YouTuber named Pearl, and I hope this isn't what they're like trying to catch me on, because this is totally their fault at that point. Maybe I should. Can I not share it? No, I can't even not share it. So. Winning. That is loud. Okay. They were like sending me notifications, but I'm not paying attention to that when I'm doing this stuff. Okay.
What is up, everyone, and welcome to Modern Day Debate. We are a neutral,
what is going on here?
nonpartisan platform welcoming everyone from all walks of life. If you're looking for even more fantastic debates, we are all over the internet, including your favorite podcasting platform. So if you enjoy debates, please don't forget to like, follow on Twitch, or subscribe on YouTube. Or hey, TikTok is almost at 1,000, including tonight's debate on Are Men Ignored / Unappreciated?
We're not gonna watch this whole thing. Yeah, I can see we got a guy from the Crucible here. It's been interesting watching some of the people from the Crucible do their thing. Very generally strange. Yeah, they're arguing for the position that I thought they would argue for. So
Today with our debaters, Andrew and Rachel and Radical Coder and Ashley, here to help us find out. And if you enjoy what any of them have to say tonight, our guest links are in the description below. You can also tag me in chat at Amy Newman with your question, comment for our Q&A section. Those super chats will get yours sent to the top of the list. But with that, we are going to hand it over to the affirmative for their opening statements. The floor is all yours. And you may have to unmute.
All right. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can.
All right. So I'll jump right into this. Radical Coder, you're gay, by the way. So are men treated like shit in society? This is the question. Unequivocally, the answer is yes. Before I get into all the reasons that's true, let me tell you what my opponents will argue, which can be only one of two things. It'll either be A, yes, men are treated like crap in society, but that's due to men being in charge, and it's secretly the patriarchy, which is instilling an oppressive system designed to treat men poorly. And so we should all be feminists so that men get treated better. Or option two, yes, but they deserve it because they were oppressive to the poor women's for 200 billion years, and they're getting their just comeuppance. Ultimately, though, I think they will concede in the opening, thus maintaining our 100% perfect tally on modern day debate of our opponents conceding the position before the debate even starts. So where to begin? Let's start with women pretending to be minorities, even though they are actually a majority. Yes.
I do actually want to. I'll talk about rhetoric too, because I think that's important. I want to focus on arguments though, because I think that's where a lot of stuff gets lost. Is that we don't end up sticking to the arguments. We don't know we don't know the different components of an argument and how to look at them or evaluate them. So there's some rhetorical things going on here that I don't really like from this person. But I know that that's kind of like commonplace in discourse nowadays, is to talk similar to this. I don't think it's very helpful. Maybe it makes it more entertaining. That's the idea. But yeah, I don't know. It's not very respectable to me to assume that you've won every debate that you've had and stuff like that. And we'll see what he means by they're going to concede before it even starts. By the way, I would actually be on their side on this too. So I would be in the S category, just to, if anybody would want to accuse me of being biased, I wouldn't be arguing probably in the way that they're arguing about it. But just in case anybody thinks that I'm on like the left side here, that's not the case. I just don't like the way that the guy is talking. I think this is not helpful.
Friends, women outnumber men, yet somehow still have done a bait and switch where they pretend they are somehow a minority who deserves to be protected from what you ask, basically from men hurting their fifis. Yes, be nice is the creed of the modern woman. Women get lighter prison sentences for the same crimes, are favored in divorces. They initiate most divorces, even though they are still favored in them. Schools are tailored to their needs. which is why they do better academically. The list goes on and on and on, and we have an exhaustive list of stats with us.
Okay, so he's given, right now we have an argument. I mean, it's modern day debate, so we kind of jump right into it. But, so women or men are ignored and unappreciated today. And so, okay, well, what information does he have to back that up? Well, one is that they get different sentences for murders. And, if someone is getting different, the reasoning there is if someone's getting different sentencing or harsher sentencing, that I don't know that means that they're ignored or unappreciated. It's definitely biased against them, though. I mean, so there's no doubt about that. He talked about the school system. I don't know about that. I guess I'll have to listen to more of what he's saying. It doesn't seem evident to me that because women do better in schools that the system is tailored for women. Also, the idea of women initiating divorces. I would agree just on the face of it that there are certain aspects of family court that are biased against men, but women divorcing men might not be because the men are ignored or unappreciated. It might just be because of shifting concepts of what women want and shifting culture. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying there are other options here. So let's see what else is going on here.
Let me also remind everybody that men not only are totally benevolent and don't deserve the scathing wrath of horrible harping women treating us all horribly because they are entitled snotty brats, but I can demonstrate this benevolency of men using the Thanos technique.
Yeah, like if I were going to evaluate the persona of this person in terms of their ability to be honest and make honest arguments, he's really hurting himself. Though again, I understand in the climate of modern day and the way that we have conversations, a lot of the conversations do go this way. But, calling all men benevolent, I understand that he would probably say he's just being facetious and not to take him too seriously. Though it's hard to tell sometimes. I know people that would straight up say no, I'm not being facetious. I really think that, and I really think that women are entitled. You might hear some people actually argue that position. So kind of muddying the waters a little bit, but either way, it's not really helping his persona in my mind. I don't know anybody who's genuinely rational and honest that the way that he's acting would be helping, that this would be helping kind of his ethos or his authority in their eyes. It would all pretty much be detrimental to it because, it's over the top and not really to the point of arguing. I get it's for entertainment. I get it that to some degree, but I think if you're really good at it, you could find a way to be entertaining and still not as kind of dishonest as this person.
If men decided with a snap of their fingers tomorrow that all women were to be enslaved, then they would be. All they could really do is whine a lot and beg and plead, and that's about it. However, if women decided...
That is ridiculous. Okay, so yeah, he's giving different arguments here, and maybe he could support that. I did. This is I guess kind of a point where I'm not getting his information here to really evaluate it, and so okay, so maybe he somewhere behind this is an actual good argument where he could sufficiently support what he's saying, but something that men who think like this need to understand, okay, is we live in an era of advanced weaponry. All right. So I don't care how strong of a person you are. A gun can kill you. You're not that strong. Stop pretending like you are in a movie, that you're the Terminator and you're just going to eliminate everyone. Okay. Now, are men on average stronger than women physically? At least can lift more. Any way you want to really dice it, on some level you have to understand that this is the truth, but that doesn't really matter when you're dealing with metal. There's not a man alive who is harder than steel. like really strong steel or bullets. Like there's lots of things that can kill any of us. So no, it would still be if tomorrow men decided to enslave women, how this would actually run. Because right now I have to take them seriously, which again, I can start to dismiss this person as any type of like legitimate, reasonable person in terms of what he's, in terms of what he's saying and his ability to make arguments because of this statement. If tomorrow that happened, I'm sure a certain amount of women would become enslaved. Some of them might even like not see what's happening to them as slavery, but certain amount are going to have guns and they're going to start fighting back. They're going to have, there are women in the military who understand how to run drones and are mechanics and can build turrets. So it would be a battle. And then you would have women that would move to different locations and they would start society. They would kind of start their own society. I mean, really everything would crumble at that point. For the most part, because I guess if you accept the premise that I think that's what he said, right? All men decide to enslave women tomorrow, then whatever. Well, no, I guess, yeah. Male civilizations would obviously still be able to force women to give birth, but women could also do the same thing. So both civilizations could still survive. So my point is like, this just shows kind of an inability to think complexly about things. And this is where it's just like, you don't have to think about his claim too much. You can think about, you can assess other things here. You can assess his arguments that he's making, and you can assess how he is supporting his claim, and really decide whether or not you think, on average, he's going to be a more or less reasonable person. It's very clear that he's not going to be a very reasonable person, even if you're, for whatever reason, undecided about this topic. And I guess there's multiple ways that you could or couldn't be, but whether or not you are, a lot of times it can be helpful to analyze arguments and let those help you decide whether or not the person you're listening to is reasonable. And then as you continue to listen to arguments, whenever you hear that somebody make a claim, you can start kind of making a bet. Like, okay, my bet would be that the claim that this person is making isn't reasonable. And, if I still will listen to anybody's argument, even if I've assessed them as not being generally reasonable, but it does start to move me one way or the other in terms of their claim. If I'm not hearing any good arguments from them and I'm hearing good arguments from another side, it's going to move me towards the side that's making reasonable arguments. That's the best we could possibly do in terms of coming to the truth.
Men were to be enslaved tomorrow, we would scoff, and again, all they could do is whine and complain.
Again, yeah, just oversimplifying an issue that would be clearly doesn't understand like geopolitics at all. Like, this wouldn't be easy for like anybody. Like, we fought civil wars over trying to enslave people, and the history is rife with people rebelling against their slave masters, and saying that they couldn't do anything is ridiculous, right? But I'm sure that this person has a tenuous relationship with reality as it is.
The reason women are allowed to get away with their shitty behavior is because of simps who enable them to do so. They do this in hopes a woman somewhere will breed with them, but they won't because women are too busy, according to the stats, breeding with men who treat them like something they scraped off the corner of the mouth this morning and threw it in a trash can. Men's benevolent and good nature can't be overstated. All of society is run due to...
Yeah, I would like to see some of those stats. I don't have a doubt that there are some women and men who have shitty taste in men and women. So he wouldn't have to convince me too far on that front. But if he wants to make some general statement, yeah, I would be interested in those statistics. And then, yeah, I don't know. It's not really. So the reason that women are allowed to, so I'm kind of losing track of the argument here. So men are ignored and underappreciated, and now we're talking about women and what's happening with women doesn't really matter. Like, so that's another thing. I can tell now the claim is men are ignored and underappreciated today. And he's now, you can tell, focusing on women. So this is, again, another thing that we can look at and say, oh, this person doesn't know how to stick to an argument. They don't know how to make an argument for a claim. Women could be, what he's saying could be true. Women could be, I guess, what was he saying, entitled or whatever he was saying, and men could still be appreciated. You know, women can be entitled and men be unappreciated. So there's not really a connection here at this point.
Us being awesome. And we do all of this despite incessant complaining from women who mostly hold office jobs, are waitresses, and fill up the service industry in general because a real job would literally kill them. We do all of this for all of society, and we're treated like rapists, orchestrators of violence, evildoers, and generally taught that masculinity in and of itself is a trait to be mocked and scorned.
Yeah, again, just the kind of overdramatic nature of things, doing jobs that would literally kill them. Like, there are jobs that kill men. There are jobs that kill men just by the nature of the job. And yeah, there are going to be some things that on average a man can do that a woman can't do at a particular job, but some will still be able to do that job. So again, just the over dramatization is indicative of emotions, which I'm sure he is convinced are female in nature, even though he's showing them right now.
Rather than adhered to. It's a disgusting society we live in that holds these virtues, and we're here tonight to prove that, of course, men are treated horribly, like garbage. Nobody cares about men, not even other men. The expectation of society is that men fix their own...
Yeah, see right there, not even other men. So talking about women then, so women could act this way and they could be appreciated by other men. So talking about women really doesn't get to the point as much.
Problems, and everybody else's too, chiefly women's. And that's my opening. Thank you.
All right, so I guess it's my turn. Some of you guys in the chat theorized that maybe Andrew was being facetious. I can assure you that he is not. That's just his style. He's very straightforward. I'm going to...
Yeah, that, I don't think you can... Like, I guess, yeah, sure, it's straightforward. But, okay, great. So she just confirmed what I was saying, that... some people aren't going to be facetious. They really mean the stuff that they're saying, which is just a demonstration of a failed education system.
To completely agree with him, and not only agree with him, but back his play here. I did write a book on the subject as well, not to like flex on you guys. But what Andrew
Anybody
said is
can
true.
publish a book.
And where this comes from is that prior to women's liberation, we had a balance of power where men had the monopoly on force, women had the monopoly on reproduction. Women were the gatekeepers of reproduction. Each of you watching this has twice as many female ancestors as you do male ancestors. Women, all they have to do to be able to reproduce is...
Wait, hold on. I'm going to back this up.
Very straightforward. I'm going to completely agree with him, and not only agree with him, but back...
Did she just say something
here.
really stupid?
I did write a book on the subject as well, not to like flex on you guys. But what Andrew said is true. And where this comes from is that prior to women's liberation, we had a balance of power where men had the monopoly...
Okay. I mean, we can get into that, but there's something...
on force. Women had the monopoly on reproduction.
Yeah, and so she is like talking obviously from like a Western perspective. This obviously is not true if you look at a bunch of different cultures. But if you like live in a bubble, or you are insistent on like cherry picking, and to be fair, like you would be cherry picking a large set of data. You really would. I mean, obviously, the vast majority of societies have been male dominated, but they haven't all done that. And so... But okay, so I guess fair enough point. And then, yeah, men don't carry babies in their body, but I don't know if this... I think they're about to make a really stupid point, and I think, again, you might not know what to think about the topic, but sometimes you can assess the people giving the argument, and you can assess the arguments they're giving. And if they're not making good arguments, and generally they're making, if they're not giving any good arguments and they're making like very blatantly bad arguments, then at least you can say, okay, well, I don't have a reason to accept their side based off of this. Maybe you have your own arguments, but women have a monopoly on reproduction. Like, women can't reproduce on their own. So, I mean, yes, women carry the babies to term, but reproduction it takes two people to do. And then she said,
women were the gatekeepers of reproduction. Each of you watching this has twice as many female ancestors as you do male ancestors.
Okay. This might be my own stupidity. Women we all have twice as many female ancestors as you do male ancestors. Is she just being stupid? Like, is she just saying something ridiculous, or am I missing I have to go through my head again on... I'm not seeing a way that what she's saying is making sense here. So I guess I would have to hear her support it. But that seems really stupid to say.
Women, all they have to do to...
It's making me doubt that she understands how reproduction works. But I could be wrong. Maybe I don't understand how reproduction works, and she's absolutely right.
Be able to reproduce is be female and be fertile. Men, in order to reproduce, historically have had to fight their way up the hierarchy. They've had to have resources. They've had to prove themselves good providers, good protectors.
Okay, I mean, she is basically making assertions at this point, so I'm just going to go ahead and watch this and stop talking until they really start to make arguments. I could give counterfactual information, but we know that doesn't work as well as just critically evaluating argument point by point. So we could do research to debunk a lot of what she's saying, but then it just becomes back and forth. Let's see if we can find anything where we can analyze and evaluate the reasoning. We've done a little bit about that. We've done a little bit of that, but let's see if we can get there.
Protectors, things of that nature. And what happened when we did the whole female liberation shtick was that we flipped the balance of power. So now women not only have a monopoly on reproductive power, but they also have political power, they have financial power, and they have social power. So now we have 3.5 times more men committing suicide than women. We have, like Andrew said, much stiffer, harsher sentences that men receive for the exact...
Yeah, and I do want to keep I think it's always best to keep the claim in mind: are men ignored or unappreciated today? I think suicide rates could reflect that for sure. So that's, I think, fair. I don't think women having a certain, being given power in a certain sector means that men are unappreciated and ignored. That really, it's like, I can imagine plenty of scenarios where two people both have power and they're both appreciated and not ignored.
Happened when we did the whole female liberation shtick was that we flipped the balance of power. So now women not only have a monopoly on reproductive power, but they also have political power, they have financial power, and they have social power. So now we have 3.5 times more men committing suicide than women. We have, like Andrew said, much stiffer, harsher sentences that men receive for the exact same crime.
Okay, yeah, and then again, that's, I think, a point that goes into bias. Does it mean that men are ignored, or it definitely doesn't mean they're ignored, right? If you have to pay attention to somebody to give them a harsher sentence. Does it mean that they're unappreciated or even underappreciated? I'm not sure, especially given the fact that we're talking about a small percentage of men here. I don't think it's definitely unfair and unjust. But that's not what the claim is here. If the claim was that, then point granted. but the idea that men get harsher sentences doesn't really speak to them being ignored or unappreciated at all.
Times as women, we have young boys who don't do well in school. Public school systems are completely skewed in favor of girls and girls' behavior, and boys are expected to behave like girls.
She's just
This
saying
is
the
mostly
same
due to
thing
the
he
fact
said.
that about 90% of school teachers in K through 12 schools are women.
Okay. And I think that's something that I wonder if I were talking to this person, you know, and debating with them, if we could just be like, okay, so let's like really encourage males to like become teachers, or is it going to be that's not a manly job? Okay, well then you can't really use that to support your argument at that point if you're part of the problem, like you're part of the reason that that's occurring. But hopefully there would be common ground to be had here where it's like, yeah, sure, we want more men teachers. I agree with that, absolutely. I think there should be more of every, you know, teaching should be a very diverse thing because you are in some ways a role model for the students, and you're going to have every type of student. So it makes sense that you would have every type of teacher. That seems fair. Does that again speak to men being ignored or unappreciated? I'm not sure. Men can get the jobs. Maybe they're, you know, let's assume that there is some bias where they won't give men teaching jobs. And then we can also talk about the reverse here, where a lot of women complain that their authority isn't taken seriously as teachers. But, you know, even granted that, I think the second part, yeah, if we found out that there was like people weren't hiring men because they were men at teaching positions, I would say that says something about them being maybe unappreciated and ignored. Okay.
And now college degrees are about 77% of them are earned by women. So women have social power, they have financial power. About 80% of every consumer dollar in the United States is controlled by women. So all the marketing is geared toward women, all the entertainment is geared toward women. The highest earning entertainer
I'd be interested in the data on that.
Of 2020 was Kylie Jenner. She doubled the next closest man on the list, who was Kanye West. Women have tremendous.
Yeah. It's weird to me that she's relegated this to entertainment. She would have to, right? She would have to. Because if you do that in terms of who makes the most, it's definitely going to be men, right? Just men who make the most. But she has to stick to entertainers. You know, that being said, again, there's common ground here. I don't know that there are certain people who are in the entertainment industry that deserve the money that they've gotten. But that's also beside the point.
Amounts of power, and men have almost none. The family court system is skewed very much in favor of women, although that's changing a little bit because there are some good men's activism groups working on that. It's pretty indisputable that women are worshipped and praised and...
Yeah. And again, this is losing track of the main topic for me in some ways. And I think maybe I've lost track of it sometimes too. I'm not on my A game right now. I will be in the future though. But, you know, the claim, are men ignored or unappreciated? If men aren't, you know, like if they're being denied custody of children more, you know, things like that. And if we have reason to believe that's just because they're male, not because of something else, then yeah, it seems like on some, I mean, I guess none of this really speaks to the, like, fundamentally, this all just seems, it seems like the debate topic would be better just to be like, if is society like bias against men in some ways, because then I think a lot of their points are granted. None of this involves men being ignored or necessarily unappreciated. Maybe, you know, the point here is that maybe men are being unappreciated in terms of just as, you know, being worthy of being a parent of a child. I could see that. So I think that's a point granted where I wouldn't take time to argue against that. But there's lots of other stuff to argue against here.
Treated with a lot of bias, and men are kind of treated as expendable and like they can just be thrown away. And the reason for this is because
there is definitely like a role in society where men are kind of expected to, or traditionally have been expected to like throw their bodies on the line when stuff really goes wrong. And I don't think that's right. And that does to me show some lack of appreciation for men's lives. And maybe it could be viewed as them being ignored. So I could see that.
Now we have an industrial tech.
But, and also we shouldn't at all be speaking, and you can tell the way that they're talking about women. And it's just like, okay, if you're going to make this claim, stick to supporting this claim, because men can be ignored and unappreciated, and women could also be ignored and unappreciated. Or some men can be ignored and unappreciated, and some men can. Some men are, and some men aren't. And women can be appreciated and not ignored, and men also be appreciated and not ignored. So there's a lot of different options here. The fact that they're trying to intermingle all these things really demonstrates that they have a loose grasp of how to support one claim with like good information.
Technological society that gives us this false illusion that women can do everything men can do. However, the average CEO boss bitch gets up in the morning in her condo or her apartment or her house that was designed and built by a man.
Now we're getting a little ridiculous here. Okay. Yeah. Assuming how the average person, wakes up and who builds houses. I guess maybe the argument there is that the average male is an architect. The average male builds the house. That might be true. Yeah, that might be some stuff that we could, but it's still irrelevant. I guess that's the point. How women are treated does not at all speak to whether or not the claim that men are ignored and unappreciated is true or not.
She gets in her car that was designed and built by a man. She drives to her office building that was designed and built by a man.
Yeah, all this is irrelevant. So again, tenuous grasp of how to support what she believes. Just trash.
On roads that were designed and built by men. And if she gets to her corner office and her computer doesn't work, she calls a man and he comes and fixes it. And then she uses a program.
So she's saying on average, I'm guessing, we understand that like women can design buildings and women can do this and that. And so I think this is a good demonstration of how the facts that she's giving may be true. On average, noting that she said on average, and I don't know what the averages are, so they might also not be true. But we can even assume they're true, and do they speak to whether or not men are ignored and unappreciated? It does not. It doesn't at all serve to prove that claim. So we can start to dismiss her as any type of like real authority of understanding like the reasoning on this issue, or being able to connect the information that she has to the reasoning. So now whenever I hear her making future arguments, I'm just going to be that much more critical. I'm going to be more likely to try to find holes in it. And certainly she's not giving me anything to go off of here. I think she's giving me they both have given me 2 points where it's like, yeah, I think you're partially supporting the claim. Everything else has been drivel, just absolute idiocy.
At work that she was trained to use, that was designed by men most likely, to do whatever job it is that she does. And as Andrew said, if you look at the careers of women in this country from 1920 to 2020, that's 100.
I mean, isn't it sad that she is and I get why you would want to do it. You would do it if you don't understand how the universe works. You would think that you were supporting this claim right here, men are ignored and unappreciated today, if you didn't understand how reasoning works, if you didn't understand how arguments or logic works. I totally see how you would think those things are synonymous, but they're not synonymous. Again, both men and women could be unappreciated. So talking about how women are appreciated and not ignored, or how a woman relies on men for things, actually might even start to counter what you're saying. None of the, how does, please somebody come explain to me how this serves to prove that men are ignored or unappreciated, whether or not the claim is true. Maybe the claim is true, but how is what she's saying now doing that? How is it serving to prove it? I can't see it.
100-year span, they're almost exactly the same. The only thing is we swapped farm labor for HR work, basically, and the rest is secretaries, daycare workers, nurses, administrative assistants, cooks, waitresses, things of that nature. So it's really like an illusion of female power without anything to back it up. The only reason this exists is because men allow it. And the only reason men allow it is because they felt like the sexual revolution was a good deal for them. Turns out that unattached sex with no responsibility is actually quite a huge liability for men, and not something that was in their favor. So I think we have a pretty good case here, and I'm interested to see what the other side has to say.
Yeah, now see, I know this isn't going to happen. This would be asking too much, but it would just be great if the other side was just like, how is the way that women behave, or whether or not they're appreciated, ignored, serve to prove that men are ignored or unappreciated? I would just really stick to that, because I think that's something easy for the audience to see that you can keep coming back to. And because right now what's happening is people are looking at the claim, and they're hearing them give information, and they're going, okay, well, I believe the claim is true, and they're giving information, therefore my beliefs and my ideas or whatever are validated. And if you can start to really undermine that and get people to understand that there is no connection, that both men and women could be unappreciated and ignored, then the whole conversation about what happens with women or the way women are treated or what they do becomes irrelevant. And then people start to pull back from people like this. They start to recoil if you just explain the underlying reasoning and how it doesn't really serve to prove, and even make the point. It can help to just like build a bridge to some degree and say, like, it could still be true. The claim could still be true that men are unappreciated and ignored, but what they're saying does not serve to prove it. And that's really all you have to focus on. And then people stop trusting people like this because people ultimately don't want to be ignorant. They don't want to be wrong. They don't want to be immoral. Many people don't understand the connection between, they don't understand how they should be thinking about the connection between their information and claim. And so I don't think that that's what they're going to do, because very few people that I know do it. They could do it though. I guess I'm just making assumptions at this point, but that would be really, I think, a good thing to see for them to really explain there. Could it be the case that a woman is a CEO and she does live in a house that was designed and built by a man, and goes to her job that was designed and built by a man, but men are still appreciated and not ignored? Because if it is, then what you're saying is irrelevant. It cannot serve to support the claim. Like, people need to have that stuff spelled out for them, and then eventually they will get it, and then we can move on we could at least get rid of the bad arguments. We might not agree on everything, but let's just, can we at least get rid of the bad arguments?
Thank you so very much for both of our interlocutors on the affirmative side. Sounds like a cat. And with that, we are going to hand it over to the negative side. The floor is all yours.
Brian, did you want to start us off?
This is a canvas, and I'm going to paint it with matcha.
Sure. So I guess I'll start out. I did think it was interesting at the outset that it was, when we were asked to do this debate, that it was kind of implicit that we would take the no position. I don't have a solid answer on this question.
Yeah. That, now I think he's doing the right thing at this point, because I wouldn't be taking the negative on this either. This might be true to some degree, and it may not be true. I can't imagine that it's true on the largest scales that exist, but to some degree it may be true. I would just be kind of more agnostic about it, and I would say that they need to be making their argument. But
I don't really know entirely yet how to engage with the question. I wrote down a bunch of notes during that. So we'll walk through this. I think the first question I have is like, which men are we talking about, and by whom are they underappreciated? I would say that like it depends on the context a lot. Like we can.
So you notice the generalities, the not really being specific, not understanding the connection between information and claim, and this person immediately getting specific. That's something that's like a big sign that somebody isn't a very strong critical thinker, is that being specific like annoys them, or they don't like it. They'll call you like pedantic, which sometimes people who are being specific are being pedantic, so that's sort of fair, but you should be able to tell the difference between the two. If we're going to talk about how men are ignored or unappreciated, we need to know specifically who we're talking about. And then from that, we can see how the information is relevant to support that claim. If you're going to say it as a generality, which, okay, let's just assume that they are, then a lot of the information that they're giving isn't supporting what they're saying.
Could argue in a lot of cases that men are underappreciated by other men. We can argue they are underappreciated by women. But like this whole like gender warfare thing is really boring to me. So I'd like to be like way more specific when we're talking about these things. Maybe we can kind of hammer a lot of that down as we go through. That's kind of my biggest my biggest point of contention with like the whole framing here. Last time I was on, I did challenge James to a debate about whether or not modern day debate is actually a neutral platform. So maybe eventually I can follow up with that, because I think it's interesting that Andrew says, oh, they always concede the point or whatever. I think last time something like that happened.
I agree with this guy's facial expression right now. This guy's got to move on. He started off on a strong foot, and now I'm not sure where we're going in terms of supporting. I mean, like, just as a general rule, I wouldn't accept a debate, and I hope I never do this. I hope that I never get to a point where I'm accepting debates where I don't actually agree with the proposition. And so this is still on him. He's taken the burden. He needs to be arguing for the claim. He's not really doing that at this point.
I think maybe the framing of the questions might have something to do with why it's so easy for Andrew. It's kind of a vacuous question, really. Are men underappreciated? Like, we just have to be way more specific about this. Underappreciated in what ways? By whom? All of these are really big. Like, it's just without answering these questions, we can't even begin to have the conversation. So I guess that's really where I'd like to start going. But I'll let Ashley give her perspective on things for now.
Okay, yeah, short and sweet. And then again, I am looking at attitude. So just the whole time she's just laughing at every ridiculous thing this guy says, and I don't know. That's not what an adult acts like. I mean, look at this. Like, that's not what an adult acts like in my mind. That's not how an adult acts. Maybe it is, and some people who are over the age of 18 that think they're adults act, but yeah, it's pretty bad. There was another point that I wanted to, and this guy's snickering too. Yeah, why is it always like with certain positions, the other side who's acting are acting like children? That's a very strange thing.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ryan. I was kind of
I don't think Andrew was responding the way that I thought he was originally, so I'll take back what I said before. But she definitely is kind of acting like a child. This was really short and sweet, and what he was saying about like it's not very specific. Yeah, that goes back to some of the stuff I was saying. Like, some of the stuff that they're saying may serve to support their claim, but because they're not being specific about exactly what they're saying, it's hard to tell. But I can give them the benefit of the doubt and still say that maybe men aren't as appreciated as they should be when it comes to the role that they should have in raising children. And so court systems give women, or they're biased in terms of giving women custody. And that would be like, okay, yeah, and I think we can agree there, and let's do something about that. For sure, right? I think there's some argument to be made about like, well, this being came out of my body. But it is like, okay, well, what role are men supposed to be playing then in a child's life? If, so, okay, so you have a mother who is abusive and doesn't hold a job and this and that. And you have a dad who is very emotionally composed and does hold a job, but because the child came out of, it's just, honestly, if the fundamental question isn't who is going to raise the kid better, then you're dealing with like a broken system that may be ignoring and underappreciating men, or not appreciating men, and not appreciating children really more than even the men, not appreciating and ignoring the children, which is to me even worse to be doing that. That should really be the underlying question in court. But I'm not convinced it always is, but maybe it is.
Amused when Andrew said, "Oh, they're going to concede before it even starts," because, like you, I was just sent an email asking if I wanted to debate are men underappreciated, and the funny thing is that a majority of my content is about how men are underappreciated in a lot of these ways.
Yeah.
But if I'm going to argue any points, I would say, yes, you are right, Rachel. Men's suicide rates, successful suicide rates, much higher than women. But if you look at it statistically, the same statistics you're looking at, it's actually suicide attempts and thoughts of suicide are predominantly female. It's just method of suicide. Men tend to do suicide by hanging, carbon monoxide poisoning, or firearms, while women tend to go for like medication. They over medicate to try to off themselves. And the thing with that is that you're more likely to be found before the suicide attempt has been successful, quote unquote, if you want to call it that. So just to clarify that little point, but it is interesting. It is interesting. Also, the highest rate of suicides, it would be in America, anyways, would be what was it, Ryan? I said middle-aged white.
Yeah, just speaking in terms of authority or ethos, it should be clear to any like honest, reasonable person which of these two groups is like being honest and like fair and straightforward. Even though Radical Coder lost me for a bit there. And they're starting exactly where I started at the beginning of the video, which was I would actually be on this side. Though, to be fair, in terms of authority, I think that the Rachel and Andrew's authority is garbage at this point. They can still make good arguments, but if I were going to put money on them making a good argument in the future, it would be that they're not going to make good arguments, generally speaking. And I've seen Andrew before, so this is kind of his deal. You can rely on him to not really understand reasoning very well and demonstrate that. But in terms of Radical Coder and Ashley, they should not have taken this debate. And I understand people are looking for debates and they're trying to put themselves out there. I don't really care. I don't think you should do it. If they didn't agree with the proposition, then they shouldn't have come here.
Males.
Yeah, middle-aged women.
Yeah, middle-aged white males. And then another thing that I thought was really interesting, you guys were talking about the schools, right? And how education is catered primarily towards females. I don't know how much I agree with catered towards females, but I do know that the rates of female college graduates are well outnumbering male college graduates. That I'll agree with you on. Another interesting statistic I looked up earlier.
But again, see, they're not doing the thing that I was saying I think it would serve them best to do at this point. Point that out. I agree with you. I agree that female graduates are higher than male graduates. How does that serve to prove that men are ignored or unappreciated? Like if men just don't want to go to college, right? How does that mean that they're ignored or unappreciated? And then maybe her response could be, well, here's information showing that men are ignored in schools and or boys are ignored in schools. And so obviously you're not going to want to go to college if you're ignored in school. And then we could get there. We can make some type of connection there, but it's not really explicit at this point. How is what's happening with women serving to prove the claim here? It's really not. It's not the best tactic to focus on what women do. As much as it is to talk about what's happening to men, which they're doing little of.
there was like, I think, what was it, in the span between in 1 year from like 2021 to 2022, female CEOs went from like 17% up to 30% in 1 year. Because that was a point I brought up to Ryan. I said, I wonder if that number is going to change, you know, in 5 years, 10 years, 30 years down the road. If we're having more female college graduates than males, then wouldn't one assume we'd have more, you know, female CEOs in the future than male. So that's another interesting thing. And then one thing you said, Rachel, that I can agree with, but maybe we'll have a slightly different opinion on, even though we agree, but kind of different, you know, is that you were saying that, oh, you know, I kind of like the way you worded it, actually, like, who would guess, you know, unattached, you know, just sex, you know, without any consequences, like, wouldn't be good for you, you know. I will agree with you that I think that the traditional role of family, you know,
I like the start out an attitude of these two people, and then these two people are like trying to be reasonable and find common ground, and then their facial responses are like slowly calming down. Like they really went from like really excited and like prideful to like kind of more milquetoast or just dulled down. Like, yeah, you were a jerk. You started out a jerk, and now you have two people who aren't being a jerk to you, and now you're just a jerk. And, you know, you have to rely on a fan base of people who are jerks, but people don't really generally want to be that way.
Husband, wife, you know, son, daughter, etc., has kind of, I don't know if it's gone out the window, but it's definitely largely perverted, one might say, from what it used to be, for lack of a better adjective maybe to use there. But I also think that, like, one thing Andrew said too, like, it's breeding this kind of culture of simps, you know, the beta simp male that's trying to like sniff after the girl and chase after her to hopefully get some poonan, you know. He may or may not. That's interesting to me too. It's almost one of the questions like we want to ask, like, what came first, the chicken or the egg, you know what I mean? So like when you take sex completely out of the equation, it just makes me wonder, like, I guess the only benefit then would be for marriage would be children, maybe financial stability, maybe taxes, you know. But so many people, especially women now, are able to just either not have kids.
All right, I'm going to finish this, but then I'm done with this because this isn't a debate anymore, really. I mean, I'm sure they're going to try to make it one, but
kids at all, have surrogate mothers, adopt. That's a thing that a lot of people are doing. It's just becoming more and more popular for same-sex couples to have surrogate parents. And so, yeah, I kind of agree and disagree, and the way I disagree is that, like, is that lack of power, sex equals power, you know, is that lack of power kind of also turning a lot of men angry, you know? And I've said this before and I'll say it again, but like, I feel like a lot of this modern day, you know, feminism, the purple haired, you know.
Yeah, this is where we're going to disagree. And again, we're not evaluating arguments at this point, but it doesn't have to be the case that, well, never mind. Yeah, there might be common ground there. She's talking about how men are upset because of a lack of, you know, no, she's saying that men are upset because of a lack of power. And I think that men are upset because of a loss of power. I think she said lack. She's talking about a loss, then we can agree on that. But that's different, right? Like, if you're mad because you can't keep your slaves anymore, that's your problem. That's nobody else's problem, right? Like, if you're just going to be, right, a jerk about the fact that you can't own people, then you're just not a good human being. I mean, that's kind of the bottom line. And notice that these other things that they're talking about that would support this claim don't have anything to do with that, right? When we're talking about men committing suicide or men not getting their children in court, this doesn't have to do so much. Well, I guess maybe to some degree a loss of power. Maybe men did get the child more just because they could, like, well, I mean, women couldn't really divorce the man, but the man could divorce the woman. So I guess it's more complex than that. But the point is, I guess it doesn't necessarily have to do with a loss of power. Yeah, it's more power that they may have never really genuinely had, that just kind of, I don't know.
Crazy Twitter feminists. Like, I think that it's breeding this culture. Like you would say, it's making good.
People can have purple hair. What's wrong with people? I mean, like, let me say, like, in terms of cosmetics, I don't really care about cosmetics. That's something, a part of culture that I don't necessarily buy into or get. But everybody here seems to be participating in that in some way. And I do it too, so I have to be honest with myself. But like, why can't, again, it's the inability to like reason. Like, you just talk about why what somebody's saying is incorrect, or why the argument that they're giving is bad, or why the information doesn't support the claim. But this isn't the tactic people take, because they can't do it. So they resort to the other stupid stuff, like, oh, you have purple hair, like some stuff that you would hear like on the playground or some stuff. It's weird.
Good men somewhat bad, and it's making bad men somewhat dangerous. So I think it's kind of a double-edged sword. But anyways, maybe I hope I kind of clarified some of my points of view.
Thank you so very much for the negative side. And with that, we are going to go into about 50 minutes to an hour of open conversation. The floor
I'm going to give
is
this
yours
about
now.
like 2 minutes.
All right, I just want to first point out that, as Andrew predicted, they conceded pretty much right out of the gate. They kind
I
of
definitely
said,
didn't concede anything.
See, this is why I just wouldn't take the debate. I do think he kind of conceded. I think they both conceded. And yeah, Andrew said that he conceded, but it wasn't in the way that he was saying that they were going to concede. He seemed to... It seemed to me that maybe I'll need to go back and watch it, but he seemed to be like saying that they wouldn't be aware that they conceded, which I guess the guy isn't aware, but it was more subverted than that. Whereas they just took a debate they shouldn't have taken.
Well, okay. Look, if you can't suss out your position in a debate when it's proposed to you, you don't get to come on and then look weak and say, well, I didn't know and I didn't understand.
Yeah, she's being childish, but she is right here. So she's being childish. She's being a child. But what she's saying is correct here. Yeah, like, why did you come on this show? You can't come on the show and then say, well, I really agree with you. Okay, well, then don't take the debate. Like, yeah, I don't know if I can watch much. I definitely can't listen to this chick talk anymore.
And I feel like it wasn't
So now you
explained to me.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I can't do it. Let's try something else. Let's go back. Yeah, all right. I'm going to listen to... And I just kind of let them give their shout out, so I'm going to...
And a little bit myself. I'm going to share my screen first. And
this isn't going to be fair.
You can see that. All right. So a little bit about me.
I can't see that.
Let's see.
Okay.
It needs to be resized. Is that great? All right. So I am Chris Thompson. I'm an assistant professor of neuroscience.
This is not an evolutionary biologist.
And I can imagine, one thing that you might be wondering, like, why would a neuroscientist be interested in this? Well, in this topic, I do have a bachelor's of science from the University of Illinois in ecology, ethology, and evolution. Now, that doesn't make me an expert in evolution. I am not an evolutionary biologist. I'm a neuroscientist.
Understands his lane, understands his skill set. That's a good start to somebody who knows how to reason.
I do study how hormones shape the development.
Understands the limitations of his knowledge. If somebody's not demonstrating that they understand the limitations of their knowledge to some degree, that's usually a bad sign.
Of neural circuits in a wide range of species.
And evolution is relevant to neuroscience, so they're not completely unrelated. But at first I thought when I saw a doctor, I thought he might be an evolutionary biologist. That wasn't going to be really fair, even though I think it should happen. I think more evolutionary biologists should be debating people who disagree with them, should be talking to them. And unfortunately, experts are just really busy people, and they just don't want to take the time. But then it's just like, okay, well, when, schools are privatized in certain states and they treat evolution as if that it's just some flight of fancy idea and that really it's just as legitimate as creationism. I mean, what do you, like, you're not engaging on it at all. So like, what do you think's going to happen? But it does look like he's got some credentials here. Study the hormone shapes, development, and plasticity of neural circuits in a wide range of species. Okay.
Species. I do this in a wide range of species because animals and humans share a common ancestor.
Yeah.
So I can learn things.
And that's how it's
from the
related to
animals that I do
neuroscience.
work with, and I can understand how that applies to human health. And
yeah, if you understand the development of the brain, it makes perfect sense.
So the other thing, of course,
it's like brains branch
that,
off from each other.
The views that I express tonight are going to be my own, and
just
do
like
not
everything
reflect
else.
the views of Virginia Tech.
Okay.
Now, a little bit about this debate. Now, this issue is not about science. This is a debate about creation and evolution that touches on scientific topics, but it's not about science. It really isn't. This is a theological debate between a worldview that requires a literal interpretation of the Bible and a worldview that does not require that interpretation. The majority of people all over the world do not start with the first principle that every single word in the Bible must be 100% factual or true. They just don't. In fact, many religious people see the Bible as allegory and metaphorical.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, the person who mapped the human genome, Francis Collins, right? He completely accepts evolution because he would be a liar not to, having mapped the whole human genome and understanding that it coincides exactly with different variations of descended species were related to. You can see it clearly in the DNA, but he is still a Christian. He just understands that it's it's something more spiritual that he can't necessarily explain and isn't trying to. It's for him and his faith, and he's not going to be a liar and impose his worldview on the actual world. He's going to let the world be what the world is. Debate between a worldview that requires literal interpretation of the Bible. Yeah, that's true. You can be a Christian and still accept evolution and lots of things in science, and that's okay. I don't think anybody should be trying to take away anybody's faith if it's their faith for them and not for other things where they're trying to deny what's true and impose their worldview on other people where they're not willing to give sufficient data to back it up, or it's going to come down to, well, this is what I believe. Okay, well, if it comes down to what you believe, then you need to stay out of the democracy in which we're all impacting what happens in everybody else's life. That needs to be fact-based. Though I understand people who believe in creationism think that their worldview is fact-based. I get that. Okay. I want to get to the arguments, though.
Most accept that evolution is an accurate working model of the history of life on Earth. It's just religious fundamentalists that start with the first principle that the Bible must be 100% true. They start there. They go out into the world, and then they cherry pick evidence to fit their worldview. Now, what are the differences between evolution and creationism? Evolution, we believe that there's common descent with modification. We believe that there's a universal common ancestor. We have a mechanism to explain that change over time. Natural selection is a very powerful, non-random mechanism described by Darwin and elaborated by others since then on heritable traits through DNA.
This is reminding me of that chick that said that humans have twice as many female ancestors as male ancestors. I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. Please, if somebody's watching this and you understand what she's saying and I'm wrong, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to continue to think she's wrong when she's not, and that I'm right when I'm not. But definitely you have a male and female. I mean, it's believed, I've heard before that that humans have more, they get more of their DNA from females because of the mitochondria. And that may or may not be true. Maybe it is true, but that doesn't mean we have twice as many female ancestors. How? Like, how does that chick think that? How does she think that humans reproduce? I'm so confused.
The Earth is old. It's around 4.6 billion years old. That's not really necessary to believe in evolution, but it's just another component of this whole debate. And of course, there's, we explain biogeography, where animals are located across Earth, and overall geology that's explained by natural mechanisms, not supernatural ones. Now, creationism, they have a belief that there are kinds. Okay,
what's the proposition here?
Fuzzy on what that means. That are specially created de novo all at once. Now, as far as a mechanism by which creation occurred, is there a reasonable, testable hypothesis or mechanism beyond magic and the supernatural? I don't think that there is one.
Yeah, and this is a little bit unfortunate. I mean, to be fair, when we're talking about creation, we're talking about something very specific that doesn't include evolution, but there is a small false dichotomy here, just in that evolution could have occurred, and also evolution could kind of be guided by a hand, or kind of be in the equation for a universe that was created by some god or entity, some conscious entity. So those are both possible. But that's kind of beside the point, I guess. But all this is relevant because it's creation versus evolution. So he's got to talk about why. He's got to give his argument as to why evolution is correct and why creationism is. Right now, it looks like he's just explaining the different sides. So he's not giving specific arguments yet. He's just explaining the different sides.
They believe the Earth is around 6,000 years old. And so they believe in a very, very young Earth, which is very inconsistent with the evidence. And then as far as biogeography and geology, they believe that these things are explained by Noah's flood. Now, the lines of evidence that support evolution, they're numerous. I can go through all these different things: the fossil evidence, comparative morphology, genetics, biogeography. I don't have enough time to go through all of these things. It's just way too much to cover in about 10 minutes.
Yeah, I'll probably say this multiple times on this just because I think it's good information to put out there. But the genetic argument really is like pretty much enough. The morphological evidence is like a good backup, or it explains it kind of further. There can be some way that genetic relation doesn't necessarily indicate a common ancestry among all species, though by the time you look at the morphological evidence, any doubt kind of goes away at that point, any reasonable doubt. But I mean, what we're talking about here is like, if you've ever watched Maury and they do the DNA tests, right? You are the father, right? It's the same test that we run. In fact, that one is cheaper and less rigorous. It kind of has to be than the one that's run to find commonalities between species. And the reason that it works is because you're not 49.9%, you're not 50% your mother and 50% your father. You are, 49% plus your mother, 49% plus your father, and then you're some small percent mutation that is uniquely you, and that mutation is not in your parents. And so when you have a kid, you pass on that mutation. So now when they test your kid, they will see that mutation that occurred in you in your kid, and they know that it's your kid. It's the same reasoning. It's the exact same reasoning when we're looking at animals. We do electrophoresis. This is the experiment. So at this point, you can deny what's true, right? Like, you can just be a liar, or you can admit it and move on with your life. Okay, it's the, and what happens when somebody is on that and they're like, well, that's not true. If you see a guy on Maury and he's just like, that's not my kid, even though the DNA evidence says it, right? Not even creationists are like, oh, maybe he has a point. Maybe, same design because of the same designer. Nobody does this, right? Nobody does this. A lot of people just assume that it's correct, but it's because nothing's at stake for them. And we understand that the guy is behaving that way because there's something at stake for him. He doesn't want to be the father. We don't want to be related to chimpanzees and bonobos and other apes, okay? But it's in the DNA. The variations that occurred in an ancestor long ago are both in us and them, and we can track that variation. We can track it the same way you can track it if you can track the variation of you in your children and your children's children and your children's children's children. And you can see how closely related you are to your cousins and your second cousins and your third cousins, and how you are more and less related to all those people. It's the exact same pattern with every species on Earth. It's the exact same pattern. It would be like if God were real, God would have to be deliberately making it look like evolution occurred, which would be strange. It would be a strange thing to do. But, that doesn't mean it didn't happen. That doesn't mean God didn't do it that way. But going just based strictly off the evidence, it happened.
So what I'm going to talk about tonight, or at least right now, is genetics.
That's very smart to do.
So as far as the genetic evidence goes,
what we
can see is that organisms with recent common ancestors have more similar DNA than those with more distant common ancestors.
And this isn't explained a lot, so I'm going to explain this just really quick, but it's not just that they share similar DNA, it's that they share similar variations. Again, when I was developed, when we're all developed, we have variations. We are not exactly 50% our mother and father. A small part is a variation that occurs only in us, and we pass on that variation to our kid. Our kid has their own variation, and they pass on our variation and their variation to their kid, so on and so forth. And so we can tell that a kid is mine. We can also tell that I'm more related to my brother if we share the same parents than we are to our cousin, because the variations are going to be different. Me and my brother are both going to share the variations of our parents, and our cousin is going to share the variations of our uncle and not our variations. This is exactly what we see. So it's just like it's over. It's just really unfortunate that we're so caught up on this thing, because we're teaching a lot of bad science in the meantime, and it's like, I get it. It's a very emotional thing for a lot of people. But lying about it, getting angry about it, none of that's really going to serve you well.
So I'm going to walk through that and the logic behind it. So one thing about genetics is that we can look at stretches of DNA and compare it across different species to see differences. And those differences, so there might be subtle differences in the sequence, right? So DNA is made up of nucleotides, A, G, C's, and T's.
I might skip this because
there may be differences between two different species. We refer to this phenomenon as a molecular clock. This allows us to estimate when there was a last common ancestor. So now many stretches of DNA, they will accumulate mutations over time at a relatively constant rate. So what I have here, this is an image you took.
I mean, this is needed. This is important. But this just gets explained over and over and over. And the rates of people who believe in evolution have remained mostly the same. I think it's probably just because they're not watching stuff like this. Because it's uncomfortable for them. I get it. It's an emotional thing.
From this website, this is an excellent website.
I kind of just explained a lot of this. So
just, non-beneficial mutations. And that this is going to lead to differences. And so,
yeah.
And what we can estimate.
This is just, we can also estimate like when roughly it occurred. Just like you have kids, and then let's say 1,000 years down the road, if all of your descendants had offspring, we could find them and we could figure out roughly what time you lived, because genetic variations happen at a pretty consistent rate. So we could actually they could figure out that you were somewhere in the late 1990s to early 2000s. They would be able to figure that out. Yeah, and then they could also, if they knew roughly where the family lived, they might be able to even find your bones, which is pretty impressive. Maybe they might be able to find your bones. They could find your gravestone, certainly, if it's in the area.
The divergence from that. So this allows us to make phylogenetic trees.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's many lines of evidence that do support phylogenetic sorting, including genetic evidence.
Yep.
And here's a map of, this is a phylogenetic pattern.
Okay.
This precludes the real genetic bottleneck is at Noah's flood. And that's true for humans as well. Okay.
Yeah.
So all humans and animals were killed around 4,400 years ago, according to creationists. And we
would be able to see that in the genes. it would be very apparent that there were a small, limited amount of genetic mixtures going on. But we don't see that. That bottlenecking that occurs, we understand how DNA works. It's just, it's not there. But
there's a genetic bottleneck. And so, is literally true. So creationists claim that Noah had 2 of every line of evidence.
For your opening statement.
All right.
Here's the deal with SEO on Wix.
Thank you, James, and thank you to everybody for tuning in. I take it you can see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, real quick, a little bit about myself. I come from an engineering and manufacturing background, not a quote-unquote scientific background, although there is quite a bit of science that goes into engineering and manufacturing both, and it is studied at the university level. So it's not like I'm without an educational background to support my position, but be that as it may, my position is young Earth creation. The Earth is roughly 6,000 years old, plus or minus 200 years. And so I'm here to defend the biblical historical account. I do believe it is absolutely scientific, absolutely supported by scientific data. To be honest with you, what I heard a little while ago in Chris's opening was that this was a theological discussion, not scientific per se. To be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah, I think, now hold up. Yeah, I think probably that he could have went without that statement for sure. Yeah, I could see how that was going to muddy the waters. But I'm going to hear what this guy's about to say, because if he's going to say that that's wrong, then he's already fallen into a poor reasoning, a reasoning trap, because it could be both scientific and theological. But let's hear what he's got to say.
But I had not heard that before then. I came mainly prepared to talk about science. Most of Chris's presentation was science-centered, not theological. So either way, it sounds like we're kind of along the same lines. Okay. So with that, I'm going to jump into this. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain.
That's definitely
if
theological.
Evolutionists use good arguments, they would be creationist. That's my own.
This isn't serving to support his position at all.
Humor, evolution.
Okay, yeah, but it's you're losing an audience that wants reason. So already, right? This is where we can look at this person and we can say they're not making arguments to support their position. They're just making more claims. They're making more claims. And so, okay, yeah, sure, humor, but here's another one. Evolution is mythology. That's supposed to be funny?
Which I thoroughly believe it's the modern...
Yeah, we know that, but we don't care. What we want to know is why you think creationism is true and why evolution is wrong. So again, it should be really easy if you're like, I want to be a reasonable person. And I don't want to play God myself. So I don't want to think that what I think is just true because I think it. The best way to do that is to listen to people's arguments and to make your own arguments and assess those arguments. This person isn't making it, so I can look at this and say, okay, this person's not being reasonable right now. They just continue to make claim after claim. Nothing that they're saying is serving to support their position yet.
Mythology. Okay. Some important differences. Creation versus evolution. So in creation, it is purposeful, it is intentional. Rapid processes, you notice that some of my text is in red and some is in black. The red is intended to delineate between what's unique to creation or what's unique to evolution. So if it's in black, it's kind of a shared region of their approach. So rapid processes max 6 to 10,000 years, but like I said, my personal position is 6,000 years plus or minus about 200. Separate ancestry, basic body plans don't change. Evolution, on the other hand, has...
I mean, that is another assertion, by the way. Again, notice when somebody is supporting their argument or just making another assertion, right? Like, creationism is true. Why is creationism is true? Why is creation true? Because body plans don't change. Okay, that's just another assertion that you've made. That's nothing to unpack. There's nothing to unpack there. You just made another claim.
There's no direction. It's random. It's very slow processes, used to just.
And then so already we're into what's called straw man territory, right? So he doesn't understand that evolution is natural. He probably does understand it. Like if you said the word natural selection, the phrase natural selection, I think he would know what that is. But the fact that he's ignoring that here is, again, a bad sign. It's showing that he's not thinking about the actual reasoning components of the different arguments on each side. Otherwise, he would understand that evolution is guided by natural selection. So it's not that there's no direction. It's that it's in the direction of whatever benefits the organism given the context of nature, whatever environment they're in. That's not no direction. But again, he kind of needs it to be that way. Now, the genetic mutations are mostly, they can be random.
Justify, you notice that it rapid and slower in black because as creationists, we obviously are perfectly fine with very slow processes, and the evolutionist is fine with very rapid processes. Doesn't really delineate between the two positions. Evolution.
Okay. If I am understanding here correctly, he might be correct, and that creationists would be fine with a very slow process, like if it took more time, and evolutionists would be fine with a very rapid process. Yeah, rapid being in quotes. Yeah, because evolution can happen at different rates depending on different environmental factors, like what's your competition, what other organisms are you competing with, what's the environment like. It seems that evolution can happen quickly as in still like millions to billions of years old, or slowly, as in much more billions.
Believes in a 4.5 billion year Earth and a 13.8 billion year universe for the age, universal common ancestry, and drastic body plan changes over time. Okay, so why do people think that evolution is science? Is it because it's evidence-based? Is it meticulous methodology? Is it data-driven?
I don't think people think that evolution, maybe some people do think evolution is science, but it's more that evolution was derived through science. It was a concept developed through doing science. So it's a bit weird phrasing, but yeah.
Does it withstand the test of time? Are the methods consistent with design and development? Is it peer-reviewed? Is there no conflicting data that renders two possible but mutually exclusive interpretations?
No conflicting data that renders two possible but mutually exclusive.
I'm going to answer those real quick. Evidence-based, obviously, yes. It's based, has some root in evidence.
Okay.
But then so does the creation position. Is it meticulous methodology?
Yeah. We're on the same page at this point. Yeah, so that was good. Great.
Yeah, I would say yes. It definitely refers to a methodology that is meticulous. Is it data-driven? Yes, it does have data behind it. We need to explore exactly what that means later, probably. Does it withstand the test of time? Absolutely not. If you don't like the evolution story today, stick around. It'll change. Methods are consistent with design and development? Absolutely not. There are two
methods are consistent with design and development. Okay.
Different approaches to origins versus real-time material, medical, and technology advances. And I'll talk about that later. Is it peer-reviewed? Yes, there is a peer-reviewed system. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Does it let a lot of garbage through? Absolutely yes.
Yep.
And doesn't even have to be origins based in terms of how garbage makes it through the peer review system. That actually happens in the medical field, for example, is quite common.
Yeah, so it looks like we can just focus on withstands the test of time. Methods are consistent with design and development. And then maybe this last one.
No conflicting data that renders two possible but mutually exclusive interpretations? Absolutely, yes, there is a lot of conflicting data.
Okay, so we could just stick to those three.
So why do people think that creation isn't science? Is it because intelligence can't create life?
No. Hopefully he's going to say no.
An intelligent designer can't communicate with people. There's no data. A very modern idea that didn't exist in the distant past.
There's a difference between something can't happen and there's no data to support it, but
Methods are inconsistent with design and development. No peer review. Faith-based. Going to answer those questions real quick. Intelligence can't create life. Obviously, the evolutionists don't think that.
No. No, now we're back in straw man territory. So his reasoning is actually better than I would have anticipated given the topic and given what he's arguing for. So I'll admit that. He's showing some abilities to at least be honest and reason to some degree, but he's committed 2 strawmen now at this point, where he's misrepresenting what people who accept evolution believe or evolutionary biologists believe. I don't know too many evolutionary biologists, and anybody could feel free to share with me if they wanted to, that says that intelligence can't create life. We think that we might be able to create life one day, and we view ourselves as intelligent. And evolutionary biologists would probably agree with this, that yes, sometime in the future we'll be able to create life. So this idea that, so again, you can now look at this person, you can say, oh, there's some disconnects. I'm seeing the disconnects now. I'm seeing the disconnects between what they're saying and what the information that they're giving and the claims that they're making. So that's already a problem. So evolution doesn't have no direction, and nobody is saying intelligence can't create life, which is different from the question of, do we have evidence to believe that life was created by intelligence? That's a different question than whether or not intelligence can create it.
Because that's what experiments like Miller-Urey and so on and so forth, more modern experience, are exactly what they attempt to do in some settings. An intelligent designer can't communicate with people. That makes no sense. Why do the evolution?
Yeah, but again, we're in straw man territory. I don't know too many people that are going to say an intelligent designer can't communicate. If there is under the assumption that there's an intelligent designer, I don't think people would say that there's anything preventing that intelligent designer from communicating with people. In fact, I think you're more likely to hear that argument in creation circles. I actually believe that. Yeah, I would say I would guess that you're more likely to hear that, well, God can't speak to everybody because his presence is so strong that it will destroy you. So he has to communicate indirectly. He can communicate, but can't directly communicate. Whereas an evolution, somebody who is even an atheist, who is a biological evolutionist or accepts evolution, would say, why can't an intelligent? We have a problem with the idea that it's just like, okay, so we're supposed to believe what you're saying because God can't communicate to us. It sounds like you're setting up a con. That's like prime territory for con. Doesn't mean it's not true. It could still be true. But, it's just too easy to do. It's too easy to say, oh, God's communicating with me. God can't really communicate with you directly. Or if he says something different to you than what he's saying to me, then you're wrong and I'm right. And you need to do what I'm saying. This is con territory here.
Evolutionists sometimes refer to panspermia and other mechanisms like that. Look for intelligent life outside of our galaxy or outside of our solar system, as it were. They obviously think that an intelligent designer can communicate with people. Is it because there's no data? Absolutely not.
Well, and this is also, let's not ignore the fact that panspermia isn't like a widely accepted idea in science in the first place. But yes, I mean, you just kind of disproved, nobody's saying this. Nobody's saying this is true. So yeah, you kind of seem to even know that this isn't true, but you're still taking the time to say it.
One of the key points to make about this whole discussion is that you don't have different evidence than I do. We all have the same evidence.
We don't, though.
Whether you accept it or not.
Yeah, I've heard even evolutionists say that, and I think that is bad. That's, as far as I can see, that's not correct. We are working with different information. There are things that creationists don't know. and that doesn't even have to be in relation to, like, there's two things that you need to really know to come to the conclusion that evolution is the best theoretical model we have right now for what happened, and that's the information for evolution. And also you need to understand reasoning enough to know that that information sufficiently supports that claim, and no other one does that we know of at this point. So those are two things that you need to understand. So, and that implies that people are working with different information. They may even, I don't know too many creationists that really do understand all the information to evolution, or even the important parts. But even if we ran into them, they still might not understand that it's sufficient to support the claim based on how reasoning works.
But that's a different story. Creationists often get accused of cherry picking data. I would say that's absolutely false. We welcome just about every shred of data. Every shred.
I mean, hopefully he wouldn't think that like no creationist cherry picks, right? But maybe generally speaking, is he talking about data now?
Of evidence we can get, I'll put it that way. We need to talk about exactly what data might entail. But
yeah, that's
is
fair.
it a very modern idea that didn't exist in the distant past? Absolutely not. It's been the default position of everybody from the time that the Bible was written in any particular era. Whether you're talking about the Pentateuch or the
which is irrelevant, right? And again, I can't tell if he's trying to make the argument here. This is where you might ask him the question, but are you saying that because people have believed this in the past, that means that it's true now, right? We can all understand why that's bad reasoning. Then the fact that he's even saying this right now should be raising red flags or causing skepticism. And it may be based on data, but data isn't the only thing that we need to consider. We have to consider the reasoning too, right? I can give you a claim. I can give you the claim that, I don't know, Joe Biden is a lizard person, right? So this is something some people believe. And I can give you the data that, well, my mom said that he is a lizard person. And also, Mars is the fourth planet from the sun. Those are both data points, right? Those are both two pieces of information, maybe not data points. I guess we could define data, but we could incorporate that too. Joe Biden's a lizard person, and roughly 85% of Americans believe in God. That's data, right? But then the question is, does the data serve to support the claim? This is the reasoning aspect. And it's at that point where we can see, okay, you can use data, but it doesn't mean that it supports a claim. So you may have the data, but the question is, does the reasoning connect the data to the claim? And that's where I think, even if you're getting data, you would need to do that with a lot of creationist arguments to see that it doesn't.
The prophets or all the way through the New Testament, that's pretty much the biblical position from any given narrator or character's perspective, is that the literal creation of Genesis is the truth. Methods are inconsistent with design and development. No, they're not. They're actually much more consistent with design and development specifically. And I'm just going to mention this quickly. We can talk about the details later. But
well, he said he's an engineer, so this would be interesting. I think he should be speaking more on this, because I've talked to engineers as well, and they talk about how the design and development is kind of clearly not in line with the best engineering principles. And this is from like a human perspective. Like, in terms of like the bar of a human, you would expect a God standards to be much higher. But then like you look at like the fact that the tube that we use to breathe through is the same tube that we like shove things into to like sustain ourselves and give ourselves energy, ensuring that a certain amount of people starve every year. And it's just like, that's not a very good design principle if you actually care about your creation and want them to survive. But it makes sense from an evolutionary perspective, because it's easier to make two holes out of one than to make two completely new holes. Makes perfect sense from an evolutionary perspective. But that's just one way of looking at it. Maybe he would be able to explain why that's the case, why that's actually a good design, or explain other reasons that there's reasons to think this.
Time extrapolation versus interpolation. They're mutually exclusive ideas when it comes to origins and material sciences. For example, you cannot use deep time extrapolation to do material science. It just does not work. It's a known failure in science. And so the creation position is that with origins, we use interpolation, not deep time extrapolation. No peer review, absolutely not true. There is absolutely peer review. As a matter of fact, creation is published quite frequently in the open literature.
Yeah. So this is going to be a problem. I'm sure that I would bet, I don't know of any off the top of my head, but I would guess that there is some, just because of the nature of doing research and getting it published, that there is some information that purports to support creationism that has been peer reviewed. The issue is that, as far as I understand right now, there's not that much. And then the other problem is, if you're likely to look this stuff up and you're likely to try to find information supporting it, you're more likely to find creationists citing their own work, not peer reviewed. So it not being peer reviewed by people who understand the information, evolutionary biologists or biologists. Really, you should be doing both. But by people who aren't qualified to do it, so they don't have the right credentials. There's no reason to think that they're most up to date on the information. They're not actively publishing in the fields. This is why peer review is important, because you want people who are most up to date on the information to be able to check your work, and who are actively publishing, which demonstrates that they're up to date on the information. You're going to get a lot of creationist websites that are, I've had creationists send stuff to me, and they're always citing their own work. They're not citing anything from peer reviews. It's always links to other articles that they've written, which is a red flag. Let's hear what he has to say about faith-based, because if it's not faith-based, that would be a problem for Christianity, wouldn't it? Maybe not. I'm not going to get into that.
And so they're technically using the same peer review system for
they're not, though.
What we believe as the secular community uses for
they're not.
The evolution position. Is it faith-based? That's a long discussion. I'm not going to go too far into that, except that I will say that almost never have I heard an evolutionist give a proper rendering of exactly what faith is. So is it faith-based? I will say yes.
Wait, why is that the responsibility of the evolutionist? People, and I'm guessing you mean, again, secular evolutionists, because there are evolutionists who believe the Bible, mostly metaphorically, and there are evolutionists who have faith or whatever. But why is it the job of a secularist or somebody who doesn't believe in faith to define faith? It's on the person who says that faith is a thing to define faith. Well, not that evolutionists don't think faith is a thing, but it's on the person who is utilizing faith to tell us what faith means to them. That's weird.
I seriously doubt very many people at all understand exactly what biblical faith is. It tends to be rendered in a very modern context and very inaccurate at that. So is evolution actually science? Well, extreme extrapolation for dating methods says no, it's incompatible with how you design and build, and with the limitations in like I said, medicine, technology, and material.
Is evolution actually science? Extreme extrapolation for dating, incompatible with design and building. Let me go back and try to hear what he was saying here.
Understand exactly what biblical faith is. It tends to be rendered in a very modern context and very inaccurate at that. So is evolution actually science? Well, extreme extrapolation for dating methods says no, it's incompatible with how you design and
I think this is where we should talk to some geologists, because I think they're going to heavily disagree with that. Let's keep in mind that evolution does need time, so it's fair to be in the same ballpark in terms of what's the age of the Earth and what's the age of the universe to some degree. Yeah, no, that's fair enough. But we would still have to talk about the fact that, one thing that often isn't talked about in these arguments is that scientists don't just use like one dating method. They use dozens and dozens, and they all converge on the same timeline. And that's why it's so significant. So it's not like they're just, be leery if you ever hear a creationist saying, well, carbon dating is flawed. Okay, well, carbon dating could be flawed, but it doesn't matter because carbon dating isn't really used beyond a certain time frame. We use a lot of other different dating methods.
Build, and with the limitations in like I said, medicine, technology, and material development. No acknowledgement.
I don't know what he means there.
Daughter products. This is a big deal to me when it comes to radiometric dating, because it's like every single radiometric sample that's taken, it's rendered as if the daughter product could only have come by radio.
Okay, so if that's the only way that we know that it happens, generally, obviously we're going to have to take it that way. But yeah, so this is like close to an argument from ignorance. Okay, so the reality is that we use potassium argon dating. We look at like speleothems and ice cores, and we're looking at like so many different dating methods that once you look at all of them and they've converged on something, the burden of proof then shifts to anybody else who wants to deny the thing by you have to be able to explain why all of those numbers are converging first. So trying to poke little holes and stuff like this is insignificant. It's kind of like if you were in a courtroom and it's like, okay, look, we have this person's, like, their fingerprints are on the murder weapon, their DNA is on the murder weapon, their DNA is mixed with the other person's. We have footage of the person doing this. And then someone comes along and they say, well, how did this person get from point A to point B in 5 minutes when it would take them like, at least 7 to 10 minutes? It's just like, it doesn't really matter at that point. Like, the evidence overwhelmingly shows that this person did it. So you need to be able to explain why if you're not focusing on why their DNA is on the murder weapon, why their fingerprints are on the murder weapon, if you're not focusing on all the aspects that serve to prove this in the first place, then that's going to be suspicious to anybody who, again, understands reasoning. And that's what he's doing at this point. He's trying to poke a small hole in something that's been confirmed by dozens and dozens of different dating methods, all converging on the same timelines. Okay, so then this question that he's using, okay, sure, we can think about it, but you need to explain why all the other dating methods are converging on the same dates first. And then you will start to actually disprove it. Again, this is done a lot in people who don't understand reasoning.
To decay without giving thought to what process created the elements in the first place, and whatever that process was. I don't care whether you're an evolutionist or a creationist, whatever that process was, it certainly created both parent and daughter simultaneously. But acknowledging that kind of renders radiometric dating useless, because you don't know what the starting point is supposed to be and able to...
Yeah, and if radiometric decay was the only process, he might have a point. No, he wouldn't. I'm sorry, I can't. He still would not have a point. He needs to be able to explain why we should believe anything other than what the information indicates to us. Right? He's saying it's based off of partially an assumption, but it's based off of an assumption that is because of data. So if you want to say that it doesn't really work that way, then you need to show us the information showing that those two things are happening simultaneously, apart from just like, you can notice. And then again, this is another indication that someone is reasoning poorly, is that they're in their own mind. So wouldn't it serve that these two things were created equally? This is like, well, that's in your head. That's your intuition about it. They're using actual information and what's happening today with what we see occurring in these isotopes, right? So it could have been different in the past. Yeah, sure. But you're the one that has to prove that it was different in the past. It's not us to prove that it was the same when it's what we're seeing right now.
Analyze samples. Can't account for existence of heavy elements, particularly as it relates to planet building. What processes created the uranium that is on the Earth today, for example? That's what I was just talking about.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is kind of related to the age of the Earth is important to the aspect of evolution, but I think it is interesting that he's mostly focusing on the age of the Earth at this point and not exclusively the evidence for evolution, which is the DNA evidence. That is the primary evidence for evolution, and that makes a lot of these claims moot, because given what the genetic evidence indicates, species and organisms would have to have time to develop in a way that they're branching off from each other. So maybe it happened that, they were in a hyperbolic time chamber or something like that. And so, maybe something like that, but it doesn't matter because that's what the DNA evidence shows. So the fact that he's not, at this point, he seems to be mostly focused on the age of the Earth and not the overwhelming DNA evidence. Like, that proves it the same way that it proves that someone is somebody else's son or daughter or child, is again a red flag.
I will submit that there is not an evolutionist alive that knows what processes created the uranium that's in our uranium ore mines on Earth today. Ignores fundamental physics when...
I certainly don't know that. I wonder why he's saying that, but I also don't know why it matters. Can't account for the existence. It doesn't. Yeah, see, this is the issue. He's doing exactly what I was saying before. We have the murder weapon. We have a video of this person murdering the person. Like, their fingerprints are on the weapon. We know that the motive that this person had. People saw them in the area. Well, you can't account for the fact that they got from point A to point B and so on. It doesn't matter at that point. It doesn't matter. When you're looking at circumstantial or side evidence, that is, again, it's a bad start. Something's wrong there. It doesn't matter if they can't account for the process, right? It's like, again, you can't account that person got from point A to point B. It does not matter because we have them on video. Okay, we have their fingerprints on the murder weapon. It doesn't matter that we can't account for that, right? It's something that we would like to account for. We would like to have that explained, but it's irrelevant given that the evidence still indicates that happened. Again, this is an argument from ignorance. And this person clearly hasn't thought about this and dissected their own arguments and sat down and mapped them out and figured out that that's what's going on in their own reasoning. So again, I can start to, okay, I'm being pulled away from creation and towards evolution at this point. This is what happened in my own conversion, was I started to think about what reasoning is, what standards I should have, and then people would make arguments like this. And I'm like, okay, now I'm a creationist, but I can't lie to myself. I have to go over here, and I'm now trusting the ability of creationists to reason less and the ability of evolutionists or evolutionary biologists on the topic of evolution to reason better.
Conflicting data is apparent. For example, observed erosion rates over deep time, lunar recession rate, magnetic field decay, etc.
Okay. Ignores fundamental physics. Ignores is probably a strong word. Observes erosion rates over deep time. Magnetic decay. Yeah, again. Yeah, these are all tangential aspects. These are all minor points given the strong pieces of evidence.
Speak volumes against the idea of millions or billions of years. An absolute standard dating method does not exist.
Yep, and he's right about that, but what does that matter? Right? Does it? Yeah, so there isn't an absolute way to tell whether or not one person murdered another one. We could have video evidence, but video can be doctored. Does that mean that we can't find people guilty? Right? It doesn't. So, again, the fact that he's bringing this up, this is what should be causing people to think and think critically and start to move away from the arguments being made here, this person and the arguments being made, to where even if you still accept creationism, you're like, you're moving away from this right here, from the arguments.
Just every dating method for deep timelines beyond accepted archaeological standards is cross-checked against another method that has to be cross-checked against something else. So
but that, like, isn't that something that you want? Like, don't you want multiple converging, different dating methods, completely different dating methods to all be converging on the same answer? That strengthens something. That, how does that serve to make something worse? The fact that there are two separate dating methods that converge on the same date for something, or that there are 10 different dating methods all converge on the same date, right? Again, if we go back to that murder scene, no, there's no absolute way to establish someone committed a crime, but the neighbor saw him there at 10 o'clock. There's a camera that sees him going into the building at 10 o'clock. A watch was broke in the house, and it was 10 o'clock when he was in there, roughly 10 o'clock, right? All of those things, just like, well, they couldn't establish an absolute standard. They don't need to. And the fact that multiple things are indicating that that's the time it happened only serves to strengthen the argument that that's what happened.
There is no absolute dating. If there were, the proof text would be that you could have one particular method that would always work and never fail and never have to be quote unquote calibrated against some other parameters. Okay.
Yeah, that's just not really understanding like the nature of our universe, right? It's very hard to find actual absolutes in our universe. There seem to be exceptions for everything, right? Like lots of things in this universe are relative. We have to check them. It's, what time is it? Well, that's relative to where you are on the planet. Does that mean that time doesn't exist? Right? Some people may say yes, but anybody that wants to live in reality, right, is going to say, well, of course time exists. It's just relative. It's just relative to things. You can view it as not existing, certainly, but you need to understand reality still, and that we can it can still be 10 o'clock in a location.
A couple keynotes for evolution. Deep time can never be demonstrated. Nobody can live long enough to see what a million years looks like or what it does to the environment.
Yeah, now we're okay. Yeah, I'm going to finish his closing argument here, but this is, what I'm talking about. This creating a ridiculous standard shows an inability to reason. Deep time, right, can never be demonstrated. There's lots of things that can't be like definitively, absolutely proven. That doesn't mean we don't have good reasons for believing them. And Christian and religious people do this. Religious people believe lots of things that they can't have absolute certainty of, but they still believe it, and they don't have any qualms about it. They only have a qualm when it is indicating something they don't want to believe. That's a problem.
Or to biology or anything else. Radical body plan changes over successive generations can never be demonstrated because in the evolutionary fundamentals it takes too long.
Yeah, I think he's being very liberal with the idea of body plan, because we have seen a lot of morphological evidence that things can change even in a small amount of time. And again, if he's just saying when he means demonstrated, if he means absolutely, we don't need it. He wouldn't even agree that we need it. He's just doing it here because the alternative is too uncomfortable. It's too uncomfortable. No one can be we can't be absolutely sure that one person murdered another one. There's two, anything's possible. Yeah. But that doesn't mean we don't go to court. That doesn't mean we don't believe one person didn't murder another person. Right? That would be ridiculous. But if you didn't want that person to, if you didn't want one person to murder another person, these are the arguments you might start making. We can't really be sure, right? These are the arguments you start to make once your back's against the wall and you don't have anywhere else to go.
Fundamentally, there is no technology that can ever be developed based on the exclusive characteristics of the evolutionary paradigm. Because things that make it different are deep time. You can't use that to develop technology. You can't use unguided random processes to develop technology, and you can't expect...
Fundamentally, there is no technology that can ever be developed based on the exclusive characteristics of the evolutionary... Yeah, okay, I see what he's trying to do, but again, he's playing with the word technology. Species aren't technologically based. Technology has to do with knowledge that we have. It's knowledge that we use, right, for an effective outcome. That's what technology is, right? So it doesn't need to be technological because it's not knowledge based. It could be knowledge based, but we don't have a reason to think it is knowledge based now.
Your technology to basically...
This is kind of like the this is that tornado in the junkyard argument going on here, kind of repurposed and repackaged. But it does not matter because the DNA evidence, because of what we understand about DNA, indicates pretty conclusively that we are related, whether we like it or not. I get it, it's an uncomfortable concept, especially if you have certain beliefs or ideologies. But if you believe that we can understand that your kid is your kid, then there's no reason to not accept evolution. It's the same reasoning going on there. To not do it is just to be dishonest.
Change itself drastically over said deep time. Okay, so ultimately, nothing about deep time or evolution can ever be demonstrated because that would require the use of principles exclusive to the creationist paradigm. Hey, James, if I'm going long, please let me know because I'm not timing myself here.
You got it. Got about another minute or so.
Thank you.
Yeah. Never mind. I'm not even going to address the last one.
Okay, converging lines of evidence. Creation timeline is based on independent methods that aren't calibrated against each other. So cold subducted slabs is one thing, completely independent of Earth's magnetic field decline, completely independent of ocean salinity, completely independent of lunar recession, population metrics, dinosaur soft tissue.
Based on independent methods that aren't calibrated against each other. Okay, so he's talking about calibration, and he's still... No. Not all dating methods are calibrated against each other. They converge on the same answer, which is also what some of this is going on here. So he's intermingling calibrated with converging on the same answer. Because if you did that with the lunar recession, you would get a timeline that did not fit the 6,000 to 10,000 year narrative. You wouldn't get that.
Presence of carbon-14, etc. Any one of those doesn't require on one of the others as a justification.
I don't know this one, cold subductive slabs. So I would be interested to see what he was going to argue there.
For using it.
In terms of the Earth's magnetic field, this is, again, goes back to another dating method. We understand the strength and direction of the Earth's magnetic field because it is recorded in metals that in iron that is basically solidified from volcanoes. So we have a timeline of that. So we know, and again, that's a different dating method. So we know that the Earth cannot be 6,000 to 10,000 years old, right? We know that because that wouldn't make sense that given how often volcanic layers occur, there were so many of them, and also that they were pointing in a bunch of different directions at different timelines. That would be something that ancient people 6,000 to 10,000 years ago would notice for sure. Okay, so again, the decline then becomes irrelevant because we already understand that it's so old and that it's shifted, that the magnetic polarization is shifted over time. So the decline becomes, at that point, it's something to look into. Don't get me wrong, in terms of being interested in science and stuff, it's something we can look into, but it becomes irrelevant in comparison to the evidence. And that's not something we have to calibrate, by the way. It converges, right? It converges with geological strata. It converges with radiometric dating, but like I said, there are multiple. But notice he only talked about radiometric dating. Yeah, okay, he does have ice cores here finally. Yeah. Carbon-14. Yeah. He's mostly talking about. Notice that he didn't talk about the fact that we do have a record through iron of iron and solidified in volcanic layers of the magnetic field, and even the strength of it and the direction of it.
And keep in mind too that we're not using these as dating methods per se. What we're actually using them for is get checks against other methods that might be used to try and date something. Evolutionary timeline is based on dependent methods.
No, yeah, see, no. Carbon-14 is not dependent on ice cores. They converge on some of the same information, but they're not dependent upon one another. So again, he's showing that he doesn't really understand the information.
Calibrated against each other, which basically gives you a rubber ruler. Now, some of these are not directly connected to each other, but when you span deep time, you have to make jumps from, say, carbon-14 to oxygen isotopes and VARVs to an ice cores to radiometric dating and geology and so forth. So there's kind of leaps in between there. So it's not like non-biological radiometric dating is calibrated against carbon-14 because it's not. Nevertheless, there's a chain there. So radiometric dating.
That's just what that's one of the things I was just talking about. Okay, so I might have to go back and listen to what he said, but I don't want to.
References geology as its backdrop. So with that, I'm going to stop and yield my time so we can enjoy an open discussion.
Thank you very much for that opening as well. And before we jump into the open conversation, do want to say, dear friends, thrilled to have you here. We are excited to let you know, if you didn't know about this, we are moving over onto TikTok, as we think this is a great opportunity for us to expand modern day debate.
Yeah, that's what I'm about to do.
Exposure in terms of bringing more people to.
I might try to look up how to do that right now.
So,
actually,
do want to let you know, I am going to put that TikTok link in addition to the description box. I'm going to pin it at the top of the.
Okay. Yeah, that's it for me. So again, I think it's much more helpful to even map arguments. This has been shown in research that teaching people how to map out arguments, mapping it out for them, can help them think through some of these things. So that's what I would have. I'm not going to watch all of this, but Chris Thompson, it would be nice to hear him address some of the reasoning of Trock and talk about how not all dating methods are necessarily calibrated to one another, that they're converging on some of the same information, and that he is essentially, even to use the analogies, what he's doing is a lot like if we had a lot of evidence that someone murdered somebody else, but he's concerned that about how person got from point A to point B so quickly, or, how did this person do it with a bad arm, right? Like some of these things, or how did this person do it when they have like a bum knee? Like these are minor details once you have a certain level of information. And so, and the straw men, to point out the straw men, right? To say that it's not guided. Chris will probably talk about that. And why does he think that it's unguided when it's guided by nature, right? That nature is selecting for certain attributes and not. Isn't it guided by nature at that point? These are some questions that he could ask that might start to cause him to reflect, and it might also cause people who are watching in the audience to reflect and say, yeah, I mean, I get that's, emotionally they might still have trouble accepting it, but on that one point, if we could just linger on it and get them to, okay, but what you're saying is still incorrect. And can we get there? Can we get to what your claim might be true? Maybe creationism is true, but you are misdescribing evolution and what evolutionists think on this point, because then we can get to see, okay, maybe there's an issue with this person's reasoning, with this person's ability to reason, and also the reasoning of their argument here, if it's based off faulty premises. So that's the idea. All right. Check the description for more information, and I will be back soon. I'm going to start doing this fairly regularly unless something changes. I'm waiting on some information And if it's all good, then I will keep doing this. All right.